Good morning. My name is Gabriel Dusil. I am running marketing and corporate strategy at Visual Unity. I'd like to give you a perspective on how Visual Unity sees the next 10 years and maybe give some different views of maybe how you see online video and broadcast evolving in that period. So let's start with channel hopping. Some of you are of the age which, sitting in front of our television, the only way for us to actually learn of new programs was to change channels. And now we've evolved, thanks to Google, to a much more sophisticated search and discovery engine in order to discover our content. Of course, sitting and being a couch potato and changing channels, I don't think will ever change, but the market has significantly evolved. And what does that mean in terms of detail? When we come to discovering what we want to watch, it's about starting with behavior, a desire to watch something, a motivation to look at watch a certain genre, such as, let's say, comedy or drama, and then getting the search ability of providing recommendations, a collaborative behavioral engine where when one person likes one content, they like another content, maybe you'll like the same as well. Demographics, content-based search, and statistics all now round up what we refer to as a modern search engine. Now, of course, there's also challenges that we face in terms of censorship, in terms of culture and values, in terms of what a brand would like in terms of the search results. And that is also part of the overall solution for search and discovery. So when we look at what's happening in the next 10 years, it's clear that there's going to be a big change in terms of how we look at online media and how we look at linear, traditional television. And several studies, including this one from the Diffusion Group, talk about the fact that by the end of this decade, we'll be watching more television online than we do through linear television. So how does that break down today in terms of 12 markets, 12 leading markets around the world? Of course, television is still leading. This is a nice study from Ericsson. What we watch in terms of television at home versus television, let's say, at our friend's place, or we're watching video on the desktop, laptop, or smartphone at home or at outside of our home. And of course, as we move into more of multi-screen devices, modular devices, you can see that the out-of-home visuals are significantly larger. But what's going to happen in the next 10 years in terms of our viewing, and this gets even more detailed. This is a study by Alcatel, that at the moment about 10% of our content is through over-the-top services. By 2020, almost half of what we're going to be watching will be over-the-top. And linear will only be about 10%, where at the moment it's 2/3 of our viewing. So there's going to be, according to analysts, a big change in terms of how we're going to be consuming our videos. And linear television is not necessarily going away, it's just changing the dynamics of how users wish to consume that content. And a lot of that is driven by choice. Studies show that an average user can calculate the number of channels that they watch on a single hand. So why should these users be paying for 500 channels when we only watch 5 or 4? So this granular nature of accessing content is changing. And the analogy that I like to give here is in the bookstore. At the moment, we almost have to buy the whole bookstore in order to get a few books to read. In the future, or even as we're experiencing now, consumption of content is more about going to the library and borrowing the books that we want, and the rest we leave. So we only consume what we need. And the other thing to mention in this slide is that the notion, the idea of owning content is also going away. The more accessible that content is in a library format, and the ability for me to access that library in my living room or in front of my PC, is shifting our mindset in terms of the need to own a video or a music disc, for example. And that choice comes to long-tail content and head-end content. Services online, some provide head-end content, some provide mid-tail content, some have a large library of long-tail. Users and subscribers are wanting the whole picture. They want all three of these areas in a single service. And this is a challenge because this service may exist in some countries, let's say in the United States, but on an international scale, we have issues in accessing a large library of content, international content. So when we look at it from the standpoint of consumer entertainment spending, it's clear that the peak of entertainment spending was around 2006. The digital and video on demand has been increasing in terms of spending on a consumer level. Blu-ray and rental sales and sales have also been slowly increasing. And you can see that the DVD sales have significantly reduced over the last 5 years. DVD rentals has maintained itself. But let's dig a little bit deeper of what happened around 2006. So let's look at a timeline. Around 2005, HD video started to ship. We had Panasonic, Samsung, LG, and a few others had begun shipping LCDs, 1080p format. The Red One, if you're familiar with Red, introduced a 4K digital camera for cinemas, for production houses to record and create movies in 4K. And that was a big sea change as well in the movie industry, and several companies now offer 4K and even 5K cameras. The Blu-ray was introduced also in 2006. The first Blu-rays were shipped in June. And by this time, YouTube was growing at a significant pace. Google recognized that, bought YouTube around October of 2006, but by this time, the idea of over-the-top content was growing significantly. Netflix as well started out their business in terms of a catalog of DVDs and now starting Blu-ray and creating playlists to get the DVDs that you want to watch at home and then send them back. And by January of 2007, they started their streaming services. PlayReady from Microsoft was introduced in order to protect online content around the same time in January, and then of course around June the Apple iPhone was introduced to introduce us to having mobile video. So let's look at this from a big picture perspective. Video was getting better quality and it was getting cheaper. We were having companies like Netflix giving us excellent quality at a very reasonable price, and we even had it free from the likes of YouTube. So that we believe has significantly changed the landscape around 2006 and affected the video industry. And it also comes down to subscribers cutting the cord. Broadcast television has become a frustrating experience. This is, let's say, a perspective that I have. I cut the cord, for example, 2 years ago. I go to my mother's house. She has broadcast traditional television, and I personally am frustrated when the commercial starts and I can't change the channel to another channel because all the channels have synchronized commercials. So for me, cutting the cord has been an interesting experience. My kids still ask me, can we have television, Dad? I said, no, you have the internet. That's enough. So if we look at the dynamics of subscription changes on a global basis, most people haven't changed. But there are about 15% of people that are cutting the cord or reducing their spending. And the cutting the cord figures are anywhere between 7 to 9%. And we could look at why, also from Ericsson, subscribers have decided they're not watching enough television to justify the cost. They're only using internet services, so they don't need traditional television. They want to save money, or there's no suitable packages for them in order to watch on the television. And maybe they want one channel, but they have to buy a bundle of 20 channels to get the one that they want. So these are the basic fundamental motivations of why people are reducing or eliminating their pay TV spending. The other thing to look at is how broadcasters understand their audience. At the moment, and traditionally, broadcasters looked at an audience as anonymous faces. We didn't really know who the audience was. We knew them as a group, but we didn't know them individually. But online video is changing that, where online providers are having this one-to-one relationship with every subscriber. They understand their behaviors, they understand their motivations, they understand their history of how they consume video, and advertising is becoming much more focused for these specific subscribers. So what that means is that advertising spending is becoming much more effective and measurable in comparison to traditional broadcast. So I present this quote to you as a challenge. The chances of a print advertising targeting me specifically are slim and far between. Who can relate to that? It's interesting for us to be able to go and read a magazine and just ignore advertisements, because we just fundamentally believe that 99% of advertisements or some figure like that don't apply to us specifically. But maybe that's only because the audience was anonymous. If we have one-to-one relationship with our providers and they understand what we want, maybe we'll look at advertising differently in the future. Often we can look at the success of an industry by looking at advertising spending, and especially for the consumption of audio and consumption of video, this is how we typically measure the success of television and internet and other media such as magazines. You can see that some are maintaining the same size of spending for advertising. Television is still the largest in terms of advertising spending, and internet is the second. What I've done with the Zenith Optimedia survey here is I projected the current growth over the last 5 years into the next 10 years, and you can see that there's an overlap of spending around in the next 10 years from now. And that's interesting because the previous study that I showed you in terms of the decline of linear television and the increase in online video and how they overlap by the end of this decade seems to confirm that advertising spending will be in a similar time frame. So how do we become more effective in online spending? And it comes down to really the ability for us to measure and optimize our advertising spending. And these are 3 metrics that are quite commonly used in ensuring that an advertising post that you're receiving online is in the proper geography. Because we're in an international internet environment, if somebody in Indonesia is watching NBC or the BBC in the UK, we don't want to show them an advertisement from the UK. We want to show them an advertisement from Indonesia. So this local aspect to advertising is important because we're now thinking globally and acting locally. It needs to be in view. The original notion was that the advertisement at the top of a website is the most valuable and the one on the side and the bottom are less valuable. But in the viewing habits that we have for individual subscribers, some subscribers are going straight to an article and reading that article. They completely miss the advertisement at the top, and that the one that's on the side is actually in view. The one on the top and the bottom haven't been in view. So the effective advertising spending in all three of these areas is important as we optimize our spending in that space. And of course, the correct brand. What we're interested in on our website should relate to the advertisements that we're seeing. So the challenge here online is to have a productive spending which correlates all three of these areas: the right geography, the right brand, and in the right view. And how we optimize that in order to optimize our spending is all part of an effective advertising strategy. So if advertising from this standpoint of most useful recommendation is down here, then the expert recommendations are here, and advice from friends and family are at the very top. And this is an interesting study because it talks about really the importance of social media and how social media needs to play a role in presenting products and presenting solutions and other types of video and audio in a way which is valuable to the subscriber. And of course, from this study, advice from friends and family are at the highest, and recommendations based on the past. And the best way for us to accomplish presenting this to the subscriber is through services such as social media. And how that gets built into an online video strategy is very important. So who is sick of this symbol? Okay, buffering. You know, I'm convinced that our children are going to be telling their children, when I was your age, we had to wait for our video. You have it good. We even had a symbol to tell us that we're waiting for our video. And I think that this buffering symbol is going to be going away. And there's a lot of evidence to show that that's the case. So if we look at Cisco, for example, Cisco has a lot of figures in terms of bandwidth capabilities on a global basis and how that's going to be growing over the next 4 years. Central and Eastern Europe on a regional level will have almost 30 megabits per second bandwidth to the subscriber by 2016. That's enough to run a 4K video at H.265. Western Europe is leading the pack, even ahead of North America. And what are we going to be sending? 70% of what we're going to be sending will be video by 2016. 47% of that will be actual IP video. 19% of that video will be through file sharing. And some of it will be coming also from web-based services. So that's equal to 4.7 billion HD movies sent in a single year by 2016. And it's actually affordable. An interesting study from the New America Foundation shows that even Prague is in the top 10 for internet connectivity, with Asia in the top at Hong Kong, Tokyo, San Francisco. Prague is even ahead of most American cities in terms of internet connectivity at a equalized $35 per month service. So what are we going to be doing in the next few years with video? It's not just going to be HD. We're moving into this idea of 4K, ultra high definition. And many of you may think that this is quite far away, but the reality is that the pixels are getting smaller, screens are getting bigger, and the technology is getting cheaper. At CES, the Consumer Electronics Show in the US in January, were already showcasing 4K televisions. So it's already been launched. We even already have an almost 4K capability on Apple Mac technology, laptops and so on, with Retina displays. So I did a little calculation on my own, and I thought, okay, what if we had a 400 pixels per inch Retina display using Cinescope aspect ratio? How big would that tablet be? It would be 10.2 inches in diameter. That's quite feasible. 10-inch tablet is quite readily available. So I would love to actually have one of those. Now, 400 pixels per inch, you may think that's a lot, but in fact, there was a recent announcement of a telephone that was just released by Samsung, the 4S, which has 441 pixels per inch. So actually, this technology is already available. And we can't talk about 4K unless we talk about H.265. If you're familiar with H.265, it's recently been ratified in January of this year. And you can see that there's a lot of companies now that are starting to announce support for H.265. Ultimately, what it means is going to be lower operating costs and lower capital costs. Operating costs from the standpoint that when we moved from H.264 to MPEG, we had about a 40%, 50% efficiency in the two codecs. When we move from H.265 to from H.264, there's another 40% improvement. Some are saying 50. The studies are talking about anywhere between 39 and 44%. The reality is that that efficiency is going to save on bandwidth, and it's going to save on storage costs. So once technology vendors come on board, start supporting H.265, we have a strong belief that it's going to be a huge success in replacing H.264 content. And in fact, the reason why this version of H.265 was chosen is because it only requires a 2 times processing power requirement in the processors themselves to decode 265. So it's very efficient. So if we were to take the relative bandwidth perspective of sending 4K content at H.265, it would be about 22 megabits per second. HD at the same quality would be 5.6 megabits. Half HD, not to offend anybody to say half HD, but I'm talking about 720p, would be about 2.4 megabits, and SD quality would be 1.6. And this is just an example of the compression that for a consistent quality for this one example. Most certainly when our walls become gigantic monitors, then HD will be passé and enthusiasts will be demanding even higher resolutions. So I propose this statement because our screens are getting bigger. We're now seeing 100-inch screens, 2.5 meter in diameter. Even larger screens of 150 inches has been prototyped by companies like Panasonic. So the question really becomes, when do we stop? And do we stop when the television becomes the size of our wall? And of course, in some cases when we're using projectors, we are projecting an image to the size of our walls already. And when we think about flexible displays, when we think about organic LED technology, LG just announced a television that's only 4 millimeters thick, and it becomes even thinner. Imagine a scenario where we're going to be putting our televisions on our walls like wallpaper. So again, you may think of 4K being quite far away, but let's look at the VCR technology, let's look at CDs, let's look at DVDs and HD over the last 30 years. You can see that by the time that DVDs was announced, it was about 14 years after the CD, and by the time Blu-rays were announced, it was about 9 years after DVDs and HD televisions. So if we're using this year, 2013, as a benchmark for releasing a 4K television, which actually is the case in January, then it's not unusual to think that we're going to have this type of adoption curve for 4K, especially now that we have an HDMI 1.4 standard that already supports 4K. We have televisions that are supporting that size, and we have processing capabilities that can already decode 4K capabilities, and H.265 has been ratified. So there is a perfect storm of technologies coming together which can feasibly bring this to our lives by the end of this decade. But the last thing Hollywood needs is a pirated 4K H.265 movie available before it even sees the theaters. I present this statement to you because we're in a scenario where movie theaters are receiving their movies on a hard drive, in some cases, with digital rights management. And we're moving into a world where we're not going to be sending that hard drive anymore. We have the ability to actually have the theaters download that content to their projectors, use it for 6 weeks, have the policies in place so that they can only use it for the time frame that we give them, and then it's then encrypted and not used after that. But we can't get into a scenario where that electronic copy of that 4K movie gets on the internet. And if we look at it from the standpoint that DVDs had encryption, it was broken. Blu-rays had better encryption. It was broken. We have to protect the 4K content so we protect the industry. Okay. So let me present to you some challenges of piracy. And this section of the presentation talks about internet piracy and the drivers. The drivers are lack of content availability. On an international scale, a lot of users don't have access to American content, British content, or other types of international content. So they feel the motivation to steal that content. Other driver is untethering from DRM. You can download the content, you can transcode it, put it on different devices, you have that freedom. And there's access to almost all content, actually. So the accessibility from a peer-to-peer network perspective is motivating, and of course it's free. But what are the challenges? You likely will run into problems with quality, with not the right audio track, with not the right subtitles or forced subtitles. You won't be getting deleted scenes, you won't be getting behind the scenes or featurettes, which you would get, let's say, on a Blu-ray disc, for example. And content management is time consuming, you need a lot of storage. And security, you have the possibility of receiving viruses and other type of malware. And of course, it's illegal. So what are the legal drivers in combating piracy? And we've seen already today, in terms of over-the-top content, some of the drivers are an easy and usable interface, which is compelling for the subscribers. Having a very sophisticated search engine that I talked about at the beginning of the presentation, good statistics, a social networking wrapper as part of that OTT service, suggestions and peer reviews. And of course, you have the peace of mind that you're a good citizen. But some of the challenges are finding that attractive price. And it's an attractive price from the standpoint of ownership versus just borrowing that content or renting that content. And finding that price balance is a challenge for the industry. Upgrade frustrations. Now, I'm talking specifically to collectors. How many of you in the audience have collected DVDs and found that the Blu-rays have been released in better quality. And we're going to run into the same problem when the 4K version comes out. One of the interesting aspects to this whole dynamic of better quality is that when the DVD digitized, restored version was released, it was actually scanned, likely in 4K, and then released at DVD quality, Blu-ray, and it's just waiting in storage to be released again in 4K. Availability is something I talked about, and of course the challenges in terms of DRM restrictions. I buy it on one device and it's kind of stuck on that device. I can't get it on other devices. And technologies such as ultraviolet, for example, are trying to solve these DRM frustrations. So we can blame piracy on the internet. Okay, just the same that we can blame the fact that long distance telephones lost to Skype. We can blame the internet because SMS lost to Wi-Fi. So we can send emails now for free through our data connection rather than a very costly SMS connection, which has resulted in the decline of SMS revenue. We can blame the internet for the newspapers and the magazines losing out to online news. And we can even blame YouTube for the decline in the in the music industry, because a lot of music videos are already available on YouTube in HD in many cases. But we can thank the internet as well. Okay? Emails did not replace post. We still need the post for some things. We use emails for other things. We didn't replace the landline with the mobile. We still use landline for corporate use and so on. It's still part of our life. We didn't replace online shopping with brick and mortar shopping. We still want to go to the store, but we want to have both. And finally, social media didn't replace actual physical social interaction. Of course, one of the reasons why we're sitting here today. So how did we get into this mess? Let me propose that the mess started when the VHS was released. Our ability to copy our programs from the television onto a VHS created a stir in the industry. The CDs seemed to protect somewhat the industry that were released in the early 80s, but then MP3 came out and CD players on our computers in order to start copying our music onto our computers. And that's what we started to do, is copying our content onto our computers. And of course, CDs were not protected whatsoever. So the industry said, okay, we need to protect the next media, and let's create some encryption for DVD. And let's also create some legislation called the Digital Millennium Copyright Act in order to define what is illegal and what is legal in terms of copyright. And a lot of that was around the notion that we cannot circumvent encrypted discs. But then we cracked the DVD encryption with CS in 1999. Napster was also introduced as the first iteration of peer-to-peer networking. 2 years later, after a lot of lawsuits, it shut down after 26 million users were actively using that service. But BitTorrent saves the day, and in between BitTorrent as the third generation of peer-to-peer networking, there was Kazaa as the second generation, but I don't have much room to show that here. iTunes Store was introduced in 2003, giving us online music. At the moment, it was encrypted using the FairPlay from Apple, and Pirate Bay was introduced in 2003. That started a whole slew of lawsuits by the Recording Industry Association of America and the movie industry, suing over 20,000 people in the US that were communicating peer-to-peer music using services such as Pirate Bay. The Blu-ray was introduced in the middle of 2006, and in 7 months, the Blu-ray was cracked with company such as Slysoft, AnyDVD HD. There's many companies now that provide that service. But protecting online content was still important, and even today it's still protected with the Microsoft Play Ready DRM. Announced actually within a week of shipping the SlySoft NA DVD. The Pirate Bay are found guilty in the middle of 2009. Music on iTunes becomes DRM free, but movies are still protected using DRM. Around the same time, Ultraviolet becomes introduced around October 2011 in order to have more portability with DRM for movie content. And the record industry and the movie industry give up unofficially suing individuals for a new six-strike rule with the participation of US ISPs. Okay, so that's how we got into this mess. And the last thing I forgot to mention is that by January 2012, there were 150 million unique active users using peer-to-peer networks. The estimate today is around 250 million users. So how do we get out of this mess? And this is an independent, let's say, subscriber wish list. I believe that we need to talk about having longevity, quality, portability, breadth, accessibility, and price as part of the discussion in order to decrease piracy. We won't be eliminating piracy just the same way that we won't be eliminating theft at a clothes store on the high street. Okay? But we can eliminate, we can reduce it to potentially acceptable levels. Why don't I have some boxes filled with other answers? Unfortunately, I don't have all of them. So let's just start with longevity. Wouldn't it be nice if the content that we buy is like software? So we buy a movie in DVD, and when the Blu-ray comes available, then we just pay the upgrade cost to get the Blu-ray. And when the 4K becomes available and the 8K becomes available, we just pay an upgrade cost, instead of having to buy the content over again and have that frustration. We also would like a service that has breadth. Okay, we want a single capability of breadth of service from long tail and head-end content in one service. Accessibility is also important. This is a study again from Ericsson looking at Spain that doesn't have a service like Netflix and how they're dominated by using peer-to-peer networks versus the US that has Netflix, and peer-to-peer is a very small part of downloading videos because of the accessibility of content. And there are other studies, for example, in the Nordics, Scandinavia, which are also similar. Portability. Wouldn't it be great to go to a movie theater and see a movie and then have a voucher that allows us to buy that Blu-ray or have it downloaded to our tablet or our mobile phone? And wouldn't it be great if that content was available on Android and iOS and on BlackBerry and so on? All portable. Of course, we want quality, and we also need the right price and have that balance. Okay, let me finish off by saying that the internet is not replacing broadcast. It just gives subscribers another choice. Okay? If we were to look at the standpoint that the broadcasters are the 800-pound gorilla. Okay, we say in business, the 800-pound gorilla, they're the ones with the strength, they're the ones with the money, they're the ones with the experience. So where's OTT? Okay, you can't see OTT there? This is OTT. Okay, OTT is the baby gorilla. Okay, it takes a gorilla about 10 years to become an adult, 10 to 12 years. And if they've already been growing for the past 4 years, there's another 6 years for them to grow into adulthood. And that is syncing with the trends that we're seeing in terms of that OTT gorilla growing into an adult in the next 6 to 10 years. I invite you to come to our website over the next couple of months. We're going to be posting about 8 articles on the concepts that we're talking about in this presentation, give you a little bit more detail about how we see the market shaping in the next 10 years. So please come to our website. We'll be sending some invitations out. The last one also talks about pirating. and how we can solve that, moving pirates into consumers. The last thing I want to say is that we have a platform called View Media. View Media talks about creation of content, ingesting content, managing that content, delivering it, and then consuming it. We have these 5 pillars. And we see this as an ecosystem that involves several partners. And many of these partners are here today. They're going to be presenting their solutions in different aspects of ingest, management, and delivery. So I'd like to thank you for listening to this presentation. I'm a little bit over time. I apologize for that. But please enjoy the rest of the day. Come see me if you have any questions. I'd be happy to talk to you. And thank you very much.